I write this anonymously because, sometimes, it's the only way to confront the past, to face the shadows that have followed me through the years without having to speak them aloud, without giving them a name. The pain, the humiliation, the triumph, none of it feels like it belongs to me. Not anymore, but it's mine, and it's time to share it. We all carry something, some scars, some broken pieces, some moments we wish we could rewrite. This story is mine, one of humiliation, growth, and forgiveness, but more than anything, it's about how the past never truly lets go, even when we think we've left it behind. I'm telling this because it's how it is, how it has always been. I am not asking for sympathy, nor am I seeking validation. I'm simply acknowledging what happened, because it matters, because it made me who I am, and because maybe, just maybe, someone else needs to hear it. I still remember the sound of my footsteps echoing in those school hallways, quieter than the voices that surrounded me, but loud enough in my own head. The murmur of laughter, the occasional shove against a locker, the whispered insults that burned worse than any punch. High school was not a place of learning for me, it was an arena, and I was thrown into it, unarmed, day after day. James, the quiet black boy, James, the easy target, James, the one who never fought back, that was how they saw me. I tried to keep my head down, but even silence wasn't a shield. There was always someone waiting to strike. If it wasn't the boys looking for someone to prove their strength on, it was the girls throwing words sharper than any blade, and at the center of it all was her, Emily Carter. She was the kind of girl who never had to try. Her blonde hair caught the light in a way that made her seem untouchable. Her laugh carried effortlessly through the halls, and her mere presence commanded attention. Everyone adored her, feared her, or wanted to be her. I had wanted something else, something more. It was foolish, I knew that even then. I wasn't like them, I didn't belong in her world, and she made sure I never forgot it. The first time she noticed me was during lunch in freshman year. I had been sitting alone, as usual, eating my sandwich, when her shadow fell over me. I looked up, surprised that someone so radiant would darken my table. She smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was something else, amusement, cruelty. "Hey, James, is that peanut butter and jelly?" she asked, feigning interest. I nodded hesitantly. "Oh, I heard you people don't like jelly. Thought you'd be more into, I don't know, fried chicken or something." The table behind her erupted into laughter. My hands clenched under the table, but I forced myself to look down. Silence, that was always my weapon of choice. It never worked. She grabbed my sandwich, inspected it with mock curiosity, and before I could react, she dropped it on the floor. "Oops," she said, her blue eyes wide with fake innocence. "Guess you'll have to eat that off the floor now." More laughter. My stomach twisted, but I refused to look up, refused to let them see the fire building inside me. I stood, left my tray, and walked away. Coward. That's what I told myself later. But it wasn't cowardice, was it? It was survival. That was only the beginning. High school stretched on like an eternity, and Emily never tired of her games. She was a queen among wolves, and I was a mouse she delighted in toying with. Sometimes, it was tripping me in the hallway. Sometimes, it was spreading rumors like the time she told everyone I had a crush on her, just to watch me squirm. That was the worst of all because it was half true. I hated her. I hated her laugh, her smile, the way her eyes gleamed when she knew she'd gotten under my skin. And yet, I still found myself staring when she wasn't looking, wondering what it would be like if she were different, if we had met in another life, another world, where I wasn't just James the target. But that world didn't exist, not then, not for me. The years had been kind to me, at least on the surface. I had money, power, and the kind of success that made people listen when I spoke. But beneath all that, I carried something else, something that no title or wealth could erase. Memories. They came at night, in the silence of my penthouse, slipping through the cracks of my carefully constructed walls. I'd hear them, the laughter, the taunts, the unmistakable sound of my sandwich hitting the cafeteria floor. I could still feel the humiliation burning in my chest, the same helpless rage I had swallowed for years. I told myself I had moved on, that the past no longer held me captive. But if that were true, why did Emily Carter's voice still echo in my mind? Why did I still remember the smirk on her lips, the gleam in her eyes as she turned my pain into her amusement? Some wounds never truly heal, they just sink deeper, buried beneath layers of success and carefully curated detachment. I had thought I had left those ghosts behind. I was wrong. Years later, the past still clung to me like a shadow. Success had found me, but it hadn't erased the echoes of the hallways or the laughter that haunted my nights. I had built an empire, crafted a name that people respected, feared even. James Carter, the quiet boy who never fought back, had become James Carter, the man who owned the boardroom. And yet, in the silence of my penthouse, when the city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could still hear them, the whispers, the taunts, the sound of my sandwich hitting the cafeteria floor. Some wounds never heal, no matter how much wealth you wrap around them. It happened on a cold evening, the kind where the wind howled through the city streets like ghosts whispering secrets. I had just stepped out of an upscale restaurant, my mind heavy with the latest acquisition my company had secured. Business was my fortress, the walls I built to keep the past at bay. But the past has a way of slipping through the cracks. She was there, sitting on the sidewalk with her knees drawn up, a tattered coat wrapped around her trembling frame. Her blonde hair, once so vibrant, hung in dull, lifeless strands. Her skin, once radiant, was sallow under the dim streetlight. The bottle in her hand told me everything before she even spoke. Emily Carter. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, that my mind, so accustomed to her ghost, had conjured her up again. But then she looked up, and those blue eyes, now glassy and red-rimmed, locked onto mine. James? Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. I should have walked away. The boy in me, the one she had humiliated, tormented, broken, screamed for me to keep walking, to let her sit in the filth of her own choices, just as she had once left me in mine. But I didn't. Instead, I stood frozen, watching as recognition flickered in her face, then something else, shame, maybe, or disbelief. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came, and I realized, with a slow, twisting ache in my chest, that she had fallen farther than I ever thought possible. I had imagined this moment before, countless times. In my fantasies, I would have smiled, stepped over her, whispered something cruel as I walked away. But now, faced with the real thing, I felt no triumph. Only the weight of memory, pressing heavier than ever. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at her. Seconds, minutes, time lost meaning in the cold, bitter air between us. Emily shifted under my gaze, pulling her coat tighter around herself, as if trying to shrink away from whatever judgment she saw in my eyes. James, she whispered again, her voice cracking, please, don't just stand there. She wanted something, pity, a helping hand, maybe just someone to acknowledge her humanity, after the world had seemingly cast her aside. A cruel irony how the roles had reversed. Once, I had been the one begging in silent desperation for someone to see me, to lift me out of the darkness, and now, here she was. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication, but all I felt was the cold wind cutting through my coat. Emily, I said finally, the name foreign on my tongue after all these years. She flinched, her hands tightening around the bottle as if I might rip it from her grasp. I know I don't deserve. You don't. My words were sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. She swallowed hard, her breath visible in the night air. Silence stretched between us again, thick and heavy. The choice hung in the air. Walk away, or stay, repay cruelty with indifference, or extend a hand. I took a slow breath, the weight of memory pressing down. Then, finally, I exhaled and spoke the words I never thought I would say. Come with me. I led Emily through the doors of my building, the warmth of the lobby swallowing us as the cold city night was locked outside. She hesitated on the marble floor, her fingers tightening around the ragged coat that barely shielded her frail frame. The receptionist glanced at her, then at me, her professional mask slipping just slightly into curiosity. But no one questioned James Carter. I took her up to my penthouse, the elevator ride heavy with unspoken words. Emily clutched the bottle tighter, as if it were the only thing tethering her to the world. I knew that grip. I had seen it in men who lost everything, clinging to the one thing that numbed their failures. She stepped into my home, eyes scanning the vast, sleek space, everything in its place. Every piece of furniture a testament to control and precision. And there she was, a ruin in the middle of it all. Why are you doing this? She asked finally, her voice thin, wary. I know what I did to you. You should hate me. I walked past her, pouring myself a drink whiskey. Neat, a reminder that I could indulge without losing myself. I turned the glass in my hand, watching the amber swirl before answering. I did hate you, I admitted. For years, I thought about this moment 1,000 times. I imagined walking away, leaving you to drown in whatever mess you'd made. I took a slow sip, then met her eyes. But hate never built anything, and I'm not the kid you tormented anymore. Emily swallowed, her gaze dropping to the floor. The bottle trembled in her grip. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I sighed. Then let's start with something simple. Put the bottle down. Her fingers tightened, resisting. A test, a choice. For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of the girl I once knew, the one who reveled in power. But now, power was survival, and she had none left. A long moment stretched between us before she finally set the bottle on the table. Her shoulders slumped, as if she had given up more than just the liquor. I nodded. Good, now let's figure out what comes next. The days blurred into routine. I found her a place to stay, not in my home, but in a quiet apartment I owned, away from the temptations of the city's nightlife. I sent a doctor, a counselor, a steady stream of people meant to put her life back together. She resisted at first, bristling at the idea of help from me, but desperation outweighed pride. Emily was an addict, that much was clear, and withdrawal wasn't kind. There were nights when she begged for another drink, when she screamed, cursed, tried to push me away, and yet, she never walked out. I didn't ask why. I told myself this was just another investment, an act of charity to close a chapter of my life. But as the weeks passed, I saw glimpses of something else, the way she flinched at kindness, the way she hesitated before accepting a meal as if waiting for some cruel trick, the way her hand lingered over her stomach when she thought no one was looking. One night, after another agonizing withdrawal episode, she looked at me with hollow eyes and asked, "Why do you care, James?" I had no answer. Or maybe, I had too many. Because someone has to, I said finally. Emily nodded, as if that was the only truth she could bear, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't about revenge, or redemption, or settling a score. It was about breaking a cycle. And maybe, just maybe, finding peace in the wreckage we both left behind. Months passed. Emily was no longer the woman I had found on the street. She was still fragile, still carrying the weight of her demons, but she was fighting. I watched her grow stronger, piece by piece, rebuilding the foundation she had once set aflame. One evening, she sat across from me in the small apartment I had given her, hands wrapped around a cup of tea instead of a bottle. Her face had filled out, color returning to her cheeks, but her eyes still held ghosts. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice steady yet hesitant. I leaned back, waiting. She swallowed hard. Back in high school, it wasn't just about power, it wasn't just cruelty, it was fear. I frowned. Fear? She nodded, exhaling shakily. "I saw you, James. I saw how strong you were, how much better you were than all of us, and that terrified me. I thought, if I broke you first, I wouldn't have to face how small I felt." Her confession hit me like a slow-moving storm, rolling in and settling deep in my chest. I had spent so many years thinking she was untouchable, but here she was, admitting she had been just as lost as I was. For the first time, I truly saw her not as my tormentor, not as a victim, but as a person, flawed, broken, trying to heal. I nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time we both stop running from the past." Her eyes shimmered, but this time, it wasn't from pain, it was something else. Hope. And for the first time in my life, I let go of the weight I had carried for so long. We would never erase the past, but maybe, just maybe, we could rewrite the future. Time has a way of reshaping people. Emily, once the queen of my nightmares, had become something else entirely. Not a friend, not yet, but not an enemy either. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Each step forward was hesitant, filled with the ghosts of everything we had once been to each other. She was still rebuilding herself, piece by fragile piece, and I wasn't sure if I was watching from a distance or becoming a part of it. One afternoon, I found her in the small community center where she had started volunteering. It was a modest place, a sanctuary for the lost and forgotten, the kind of place I never imagined Emily Carter would find herself. And yet, there she was, kneeling beside a little girl, guiding her small hands as she shaped clay into something unrecognizable but precious. Emily's laughter, softer, realer than I had ever known it, floated through the air. Not the sharp-edged laughter that once haunted my nightmares, but something else, something lighter. It was strange how unfamiliar it sounded to me, even after all these months. She looked up and saw me standing by the doorway, A flicker of hesitation crossed her face before she wiped her hands on a towel and stood. "You came," she said. It wasn't a question, just a quiet acknowledgement. I shrugged, didn't think I would. She studied me for a moment before gesturing at an empty seat beside her. "Stay for a bit?" I hesitated, but then I sat. The little girl looked up at me, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. Emily smiled at her before turning back to me. "This is Sarah," she said. "She's making a butterfly." The girl held up the misshapen lump of clay, beaming with pride. "It's not done yet," she said seriously. I nodded. "Looks like it's getting there." Sarah grinned and went back to work. Emily watched her for a moment before exhaling softly. "She reminds me of myself," she admitted, "before everything, before I became who I was." I didn't respond right away, because what could I say? That I understood? That I had spent so long hating her, I didn't know how to see her as anything else? She turned to me. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" I met her gaze, seeing the weight of years in her eyes. "No," I said finally, "but I wish things had been different." She nodded slowly. "Me too." And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was just understanding. A shared ache for a past we could never change and a future that was still unwritten. We sat in silence for a while, watching Sarah mold her butterfly, watching her create something imperfect but new. Maybe, just maybe, we could do the same.